All right, welcome friends to episode 95 of the Inglorian Bastards campaign. With me tonight I have my friend Marco, who plays Feredir. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing me back, I should say.
Yeah, so we did an interview at the somewhere in the middle of part one, I think, and then you came back for the full cast reunion for the Search for Tol Eressëa campaign, and then now we're in Rise of the Mormegil, and this episode will air kind of after our in-person session, so the beginning part of the fight with Túrin and Glaurung, and actually the Shadow Mire, which we call Gwarthaur. What were you thinking at the end of part one, right? So you guys had just kind of defeated Gwarthaur, who you didn't know was called Gwarthaur at the time. You defeated the Shadow. Riken dove through the portal, and here you guys are trying to debate what to do. I mean, so why did Feredir get on that boat at the Grey Havens?
Well, he felt like the story wasn't over, and
literally, the story was not over.
Yeah. No, he felt like a duty to pursue the shadow that was unleashed into the world. Yeah. And Riken jumped through that portal, and we weren't really sure what was going to happen next, but there was no way he was staying behind.
Yeah. Well, they had both Círdan and I think Gildor and Glorian, the person who kind of set all of this in motion. They were both there, and during the fight, they mentioned I think Tauber was what they said, and they also said. And Daggoreth was the last thing that they said. So that at the end of part one, you guys kind of got a hint of what was to come, if for people that were really into the lore. And Feredir probably did have some kind of a clue about the Daggoreth, the greatest of all battles. The first interview we did was crucial because the listener, was coming kind of cold into the campaign, and they really needed to get a sense of the characters. This interview, I think, is going to be more of like a how did Feredir evolve episode, if that works for you.
Sure. Yeah.
So I guess at this point in the campaign, if you can remember what was going on in Feredir's mind as he sort of stepped into the Calakiria, right? The sky had gone dark. We know that the guard at the door of night had fallen, or we think that maybe he had fallen because the shadow did something. The man in black did something in the workshop of Ale. What's going? You're standing on top of the caves of the Forgotten. What's going through Feredir's mind at this time?
Well, all the prophecies are coming true, and in a way, a lot of it's kind of self-fulfilled because we unleashed that shadow onto the world, and this is kind of like a pretty heavy moment, and I think we're looking for some sort of redemption here and try to save save face. The other thing going on in Feredir's head is sort of, I guess he always looked up to Túrin as like this great iconic hero, tragic hero in like the Númenórean bloodline, in the past, and now he's kind of feeling that as well, like the sorrow that Túrin's feeling, and he there's a lot of parallels you can draw between Feredir and Túrin, and that's gonna come into play, I think, pretty soon, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in the first part of the campaign for a while, they were starting to call, some of the elves were starting to call you the Mormegil, the man in black. Right. And when we started this, was it clear to you whether the Rise of the Mormegil was about you or whether it was about Túrin?
it was not clear at all.
Yeah.
It was at first I thought about me, and then it was about me, and I was like, no, that can't be right. I'm not. There's no way. Like my character's that special, you know.
Well, I mean, he was pretty crucial to all of this, and as we'll see at the end of this fight, it's possible that your destinies are more intertwined than anybody could have guessed. That's true. Yeah.
And the last thing that he's pretty bummed about is, you know, his toy sword broke. Like that was like, I feel like that was like half of my character's identity was that sword. There was Feredir, and then there was
Anguirel. Yeah. He has pretty awesome sword.
He was just cutting through people with that thing. Like that was the weapon of the campaign, I'd say.
Yeah, I didn't give out very many of those types of artifact level swords, and you got yours for like, I think it was like the second episode. And you're right, your character kind of developed along with it. I remember you saying when we were in the Withered Heath, you that fight where you just tore through people, you're like, this is the fight I've been waiting for.
Yeah. And Túrin has his own sword, you know, with him, right? And
Girthang.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it broke because we sort of crossed swords, right?
Yeah, so I actually kind of planned this. I gave Túrin a power, which is a pretty standard monster / NPC power called parry, where you could I don't remember the exact mechanics, but it was essentially he could block up to 10 hit points of damage if you were to actually hit him, right? So he does this thing where he raises his sword and he parries, and you know, maybe the blade slides down and cuts into him a little bit, but essentially he staves off some of the damage. But the whole point of this was to, have the blades collide, the sister swords that were never supposed to be in battle against each other. And obviously that's not part of canon. I threw that in there. Right. But there was a great explosion when they hit. So what are your thoughts at this point on the second prophecy of Mandos? Can you remember any parts of that? I think you guys have heard at least 2 or 3 parts of it. I broke the prophecy into like 4 parts so that you would discover more and more about the prophecy. Right. This was the one that talked about how Túrin was going to finally deal the final blow to Morgoth on the plains of Valinor and fight with the Valar, right? At this point, what is Feredir thinking about that prophecy?
Like, we're 2/3 of the way there. Like this battle might actually happen, you know?
So Morgoth's probably en route.
Yeah.
But you know that, I mean, at this point, Túrin is possessed. Right. So what is Feredir thinking in terms of like, well, how is this going to work? He's like, Túrin's like working for the enemy.
I'm sort of thinking like, we gotta basically exercise this guy because we need him in this final fight. The prophecy says that Túrin's going to be riding in there, like right-hand man, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So this battle for you probably wasn't all about, slash and kill. You can't kill an Ainur, right? You can't kill Gwarthaur. He's possessed Túrin, and you can cut Túrin's body to shreds, but you can't really kill Gwarthaur. So
right, that life essence is just tied to this world. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, so he suggested that you guys sort of bind his essence to something else.
Right.
And so I think it was Okryn who did that, or possibly even Zelindor coming up. And so that's the plan, right? Is to do a ritual to bind Gwarthaur. And
I don't want to give anything away, but the ending of this battle is pretty. It goes out with a bit of a bang, if I remember correctly.
It sure does. There's something to look forward to. So we took I think we took like 4 to 6 months off in between part 1 and part 2, and
Yeah.
for after part 2, we went right into part 3. So obviously, you're rooting for the good guys, right? And if the good guys come through this in part 2, theoretically, hypothetically, there's something that happens right away that will be both scary, I think, especially for Feredir. I mean, maybe a little bit of a hint. I think the listeners have actually already gotten the hint, and you're near the city of Tyrion, but you're also on top of the Calicuria, where Feredir's people lie. Caves of the Forgotten.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
Do you have like a favorite NPC or like a favorite scene that you can remember from part 2?
There's one part that I like that hasn't come up yet. I liked the duality of Turin here and like the second wave of like his tragic story, and I like that. It sort of felt like I know we had like the whole team there fighting him and his lackeys and the dragon, but it kind of felt like at one point it was just me and him like duking it out, and then like just like both our swords just like exploded.
Yeah,
I thought that was the coolest moment for me.
Well, it was his name, Túrin Turambar, Master of Fate, mastered, right? Like it took this. He mentioned his tragic story, right? Like his father being captured by Morgoth, him essentially being orphaned in a way, like falling in love with his sister, like killing himself, killing his best friend, and like and here he is at the end of near the end of days, essentially fighting with people who have met a tragic end, right? We have Finwillas from Nargothrond, who he was essentially, Turin was Glaurung originally like put a spell on him, and so they carried off Finwillis, and he wasn't able to save her. Mim the dwarf, right, who was killed along with his whole family by when he was the outlaw Nathan the Wronged. And Beleg Cuthalion is brought back here and is now fighting essentially under the Shadow's spell, who Beleg was actually killed by Turin when Beleg came to rescue him, right? So, all of these people who he's wronged are now back working for the Shadow, essentially. And here Turin comes in riding his mortal enemy. I mean, talk about a tragic story that just gets worse.
Yeah.
One other question I wanted to ask you. There was a scene at the Cottage of Lost Play where I had written that blog entry that I gave you. It was regarding a young Feredir. Do you remember this?
I do vaguely remember. It was like I was visited in a dream by the man in black, right?
Yeah, so I remember learning about the Allore Male, which is the path of dreams, and how mortal children, human, came essentially through this path of dreams in their childhood, to hear stories and do supper at the Cottage of Lost Play. And so one of the dreams that you had when you were a kid, where you traveled the path of dreams, you woke up there and you saw a man in black standing there looking to the west. And you described, when you had woken up the next morning, you described to your mother that the man's sword glowed red, but the blade was as black as the hills at night, I think were the words I used. And I tried to make it like you weren't really sure who that was. Did you have any idea whether that was the man in black or whether you were looking at yourself later in the future? Do you remember this?
Yeah, I remember this. I wasn't sure whether it was me.
Yeah.
Or what. But that was kind of like the fun of the whole campaign, was trying to figure out like who we were actually chasing. And
All right. Well, I think that's all I got for you tonight. You're going to actually be back here pretty soon. We're going to do the full cast reunion for part 2. So
Yeah.
you guys will be back and riffing off each other, just like no time has passed, I'm sure. But thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks again for having me.
All right. Take care.
All right. Enjoy, everyone. Thanks.